Welcome to Rich Web Experiences and the Future of the Web. Today we're going to talk about the web as a medium and different techniques and features you can use of the web to create richer web experiences. And my hope is that by displaying the technology in this way, it'll show some trends and a trajectory for where things may be headed in the future. So first, a little bit about me. I'm CJ Gammon. I work at Adobe out of San Francisco, and I spend my time creating interactive applications and experiences focusing on web technologies. And I'm really interested in where the web community and this technology is taking us. Specifically, I've always been really passionate about the immersive kinds of experiences people have been able to create with digital media. And this is what we're going to focus on today. So before I get too into it, I want to kind of define what it is we mean by rich media experiences. Typically, you'll hear the term rich media in the context of advertising or display ads, where you're talking about rich media banner ads that typically have a lot of animation and interaction. But I want to use a broader definition. So we're going to, when I refer to rich web experiences, we're talking about mixed media leveraging interactivity and the web for an immersive experience. And as you can imagine, these are highly creative and are intended to inspire a sense of awe in the user. So let's kind of talk about the relationship that rich media has had with the web and how this has changed a little over time. Initially, with the web, it was intended for documents, and these consisted primarily of text. And eventually we got images, but I want to be clear that sometimes this is all you need. You don't always need to have a rich, immersive experience, and the point of all this is to create the best presentation layer for your content. And no one knows your content like you, and there are a variety of different types of content out there, and these all deserve to be treated differently. Eventually, though, we got Flash, and Flash brought a lot of rich interactivity and animation to the web long before it was available natively. So this is an example of a Flash site created back in 2007 by an agency called WebRTC. And you can see there's a lot of rich imagery and graphics going on. And it's really not really reminiscent of the vertically scrolling text-based websites we're used to. And in Flash, we saw a lot of people pushing the limits of what these browsers and what the platform was capable of. So when mobile came around, it changed the game for the web. And we saw our screen sizes getting smaller and our devices and hardware getting weaker. And so a lot of these richer experiences that were pushing the limits of desktop browsers didn't work as well on these mobile devices. So we saw a lot of things going back towards more text-based experiences. But as things get better and as our hardware or mobile hardware is improving, we're starting to see people push the limits again of what the technology is capable of, specifically in HTML. So now I want to kind of go through HTML and some features making their way to the platform that are going to enhance the kinds of experiences we can create. Before I do this, though, I want to do a bit of a disclaimer. How many of you guys use caniuse.com? Awesome. So a good amount of people. So caniuse is a great resource for browser compatibility tables, and it specifies which version of what features are supported in which versions of the browsers. So, and I mention this because a lot of the things we're going to talk about are newer or coming features that might not be supported everywhere yet. So we're going to start with the basics and kind of build from there. We have CSS, which is a styling language that allows us to style our documents. And we tend to think of this in a very primitive way, things like changing color or fonts. But we've actually seen some great examples of people using it for really complex artwork and illustrations using shapes and CSS. And we can also use it to create interesting transitions, like 3D transforms and scaling. We can also animate background positions. But there are some new features making their way to CSS that are going to enhance the kind of things we can do with it. One of those is clip paths. And if you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, we have vector mask and clip paths. And these allow you to define the transparent portions of your content. So you basically define a shape and define what parts are opaque and transparent. Here's an example of how we can actually use this. We have our content on the right, and we're defining a circle with CSS. And we're able to actually transition this because it's all defined in CSS. And you can see how we can actually hide and reveal portions of our content. And the syntax for this is really simple. We just define a shape, and in the case of an ellipse, we can define the position and also the radial width and radial height. And we can also define polygons. And because it's in CSS, we can actually transition these shapes and animate them. So here's an example of a user interface that actually uses clip paths to kind of transition and reveal this content. So you can see we're not actually changing anything about the content. We're just adjusting the visible portions of it with CSS. So you can see how you could create really rich user interfaces and transitions with this technique. We also have masks in Photoshop. So designers have used masks for a long time, and in the context of layer masks. And it allows you to use an image to define the transparent and opaque portions of your content. So this is making its way to CSS. And what we can do with this is actually use an image that supports transparency like a ping. So we have our content on the right, and then we have a ping that has its alpha channel, creating this rich texture. And we can apply this texture to our HTML content. So you can see how you can give even semantic content really rich textures. And the syntax is very similar to CSS backgrounds. So we can define an image and also its position and repeat. And this gives us a lot of flexibility in how we can sort of animate and transition the masks that we're applying to our content. And here's an example. We can actually repeat the images, so we can actually apply the mask to multiple semantic content. This is all still selectable content with this texture, and even animate the backgrounds behind it. So within this masked content back here, we're actually animating and transitioning this content. So you could apply a lot of rich effects to your sites using this technique. Blend modes are another awesome designer feature that's making its way to the web. And this allows you to mix and interpolate the layers of your content and the color values of them, creating richer sort of mixing capabilities better than opacity. So this is actually making its way to the web in a number of ways. And one of those is background blend modes, which allows you to use your multiple background layers and actually specify the blend modes for those layers. So it'll specify how those blend and mix with the other background layers of that element. We're also getting mixed blend modes, which is even more powerful and allows us to actually blend elements with all of the content behind it. So I want to show you an example of how this can work. And this is kind of a flat site. And you can see I'm just playing around with color here. But if I open it up in Canary, because this is actually a really experimental feature, so it's only supporting Canary right now. But you can see if I open up the same content, we get this rich blending between the background layers. As I scroll, you can see as they overlap, it's blending with the different layers. And even the text here is using mixed blend modes. So I have these, each character wrapped in a span tag, and it's applying blending to each of them so they blend with all the other layers. So you can see how this creates this really rich sort of mixing effect. And the nice thing is you don't have to go back and forth between your design tools, right? You don't have to go into Photoshop and render out a static image with these sorts of effects. You can actually do it in real time on the web and animate content behind it, creating this rich sort of visual effect as the user scrolls through your content. So if you've used Photoshop, you probably played around with images and adjusted various properties of the image, like the grayscale or sepia tone. And these are the kinds of effects we can apply to our HTML content with CSS filters. And the syntax for this is really easy. It's just filter, and then you apply the method with the specific filter that you're wanting to apply with its value. And this has been available for a while. It's actually in iOS, so you can play around with it today. We have a variety of different filters to choose from. And because it's in CSS, we can transition these, creating rich visual transitions within our HTML content. And here I'm applying it to an image, but we can apply it to any HTML content. It doesn't have to just be images. But another cool thing about filters is that we can actually stack and combine filters. So here, if you watch, I'm going to apply a bunch of filters at once, creating this rich, old-style photo effect, similar to the kinds of effects you'd see in photo sharing applications like Instagram. So how many of you guys are designers? Call yourself, okay. good number. So designers are probably really familiar with the different image formats we have available. Raster and vector images. So raster images are made up of pixels, and the issue here is that when you try to scale them or view them on high resolutions, you get this pixelation or this blurring of the image, so it starts to look really bad. But vector images are awesome because they're made up of geometric primitives which scale and retain those crisp edges as you scale the content, which is especially useful on high resolution devices. So on the web, we have SVG, which is the vector format for the web. And SVG is actually really powerful, especially when you combine it with CSS. So we can actually use CSS to manipulate the properties of our SVG content. You can see here, as I hover this content, we're actually using CSS to adjust the stroke width and the fill colors being applied here. And I'm using CSS to scale the lightning bolt as well. We can also apply it to animated SVG content in the same way. But where SVG gets really magical, I think, is when you combine it with JavaScript. So we can use JavaScript to manipulate our SVG content dynamically and allow users to actually interact with it in really creative ways. So I think there's a lot of interesting potential here, especially for things like user interfaces. So when using scripting and SVG, there are a number of different frameworks out there that abstract the API, making it easier to use. And these are a few of the most popular ones. And they each have a different priority. Each of them have a different focus. And Raphael.js's focus is backwards compatibility. So it works all the way back to IE6 when SVG wasn't even supported. D3.js is focused on data visualization, so things like graphs and charting, and it has a lot of helper methods that assist you in doing this easily. And Snap SVG is actually the newer of the three, and it was recently open sourced by Adobe and created by the guy who made Raphael.js, Dmitry Baranovsky, who's awesome. And so Snap is focused on modern SVG usage. And this allows you to get support for some of the newer cutting-edge features that SVG has that aren't supported in things like Raphael. So I've been playing around with Snap a lot. And one of the things that is really cool and gives you a lot of power when playing around with scripting in SVG is generative artwork. So you can see here we have all these squares and these patterns. But if I was to manually build all this, that would take forever, right? So what I can do is I can script it and automate this process, making it easier to generate really cool, complex artwork. But because it's SVG, I can also scale it at any size and not be concerned about the resolution. We can also do sequenced animation. So this is a banner ad that we put together for Snap SVG, using Snap SVG. And you can see how we're actually transitioning all this SVG content and animating it in this animated sequence. So I think there's a lot of cool potential for animation when using SVG content as well. Another great use of SVG is with interactive applications. So here we have an example of an illustration that I put together in Adobe Illustrator. And you can see we're just using Snap to animate and have these characters sort of fly out as a user interacts with it. And I think it goes even beyond these sort of like this is kind of a game example, but if you think of like data visualization and charting, allowing your users to dig deeper into data and get better information about what it is you're presenting them has a lot of potential. So we also have 2D Canvas on the web, and this is Canvas's 2D drawing context. And it provides a 2D API for manipulating the pixels or canvas element and drawing shapes and images. And so because it's so close to scripting, what we can actually do is create completely unique experiences. So every time I interact with something, I'll get a completely unique dynamic experience. So we can make our content really unique so that every time a user experiences something or comes to your site, they get something different. We can also combine it with larger JavaScript libraries like physics engines. So here I'm actually using a physics engine to create dynamic fluid simulation as we're interacting with this element. But we can also bring in other forms of media into our canvas context. So here I'm actually using video and animating video based on my hover state. So what we can do is actually create these rich buttons and rich hover effects using canvas and video. So just like with SVG, there are a variety of frameworks that abstract the API, and these are really just a few, and they each have their own priority as well. So easel.js, if you guys are familiar with Flash and its API, provides a Flash-like API for interacting with Canvas, and it also gives you that whole display list, making it easier to retain your elements and manipulate them. Processing.js comes from the Java world, so in the processing language, and it has a really simple API for drawing things quickly and animating them on the screen. Pixie.js is similar to easel.js in that it gives you a display list, but its focus is on performance, so it's a high-performance 2D canvas framework. We're also getting some new features in Canvas as well. So now we have Canvas blend modes, and you guys can actually play with this today. This is out in Chrome. And what this allows us to do is cool effects like this. So this is a little demo I put together with Pixie.js, because Pixie.js's Canvas renderer actually supports blend modes already. And you can see how as the colors sort of overlap and blend with each other, we get this rich bleeding effect. This is using the color burn blend mode. And it's a kind of effect that you really couldn't achieve without blend modes on the web. And it's really useful, especially in these gaming contexts, but with like rich motion graphics and particles. So another thing we've been able to do as designers in the past is create dynamic masks and draw whatever it is we want and be able to apply that to our content as a mask. If you're familiar with After Effects or Flash, you've often been able to draw things and then just use that to mask and hide portions of your content. So I was kind of wondering, like, how could we do this on the web? Well, we have 2D Canvas, which is a 2D API, so we can dynamically draw whatever we want. But then how do we get the end result? You can see I have my element here, and then I have my canvas that I'm just drawing sort of randomly onto. But how do you use that as a mask? So there's actually a way to do this. Unfortunately, it's WebKit specific right now, but there's an article you guys can check out if you want to read more on this. I'll post these slides up later too. But so the way that we do this is in WebKit, there's this idea of CSS canvas drawing. And it lets you access your canvas element in CSS as a CSS image. So we can create our canvas context using this method on the document called getCSSCanvasContext. And we pass it an ID. And then we're able to reference that as that canvas element as a CSS image with this WebKit canvas method using that same ID. And so then we can use that either just like we would any image in CSS, either as a background or in this case as a mask. So you might be wondering, well, how is this useful? I have a little demo that I want to show you guys. We worked with Food Network, and they have this great application that features all these wonderful cupcake recipes. So we wanted to take this content and bring it to the web, showcasing some of these features. So we're actually using a lot of these features in the site. You can see we have a lot of textures applied to our content, and we're using clip paths to create these shapes at the bottom here. And because of that, I'm able to just sort of like transition the background color instead of using separate images for each of these items. But where I think it really gets interesting is in the transitions we're using here. So we're using this masking technique to transition through different portions of our content. So if you watch as I click here, what's going to happen is we're actually going to get this animated transition that's going to transition out this layer and then go into the next section. So watch. Okay, so that was pretty quick. But I'm going to slow it down so you guys can see it in slow motion. So you can see we have this animated dissolve, right? And I think this is really powerful because it means that we can draw whatever we want and use it as a mask and update it in real time. So the potential here is really endless. One other thing I wanted to show about this is we actually implemented the speech API. So because it's a cupcake application and people are often going to be cooking, they might have their hands dirty, right? So we don't really want them touching their computer while they're cooking. So we wanted them to be able to navigate it without doing that. So here I'm going to kind of demo it quick. Recipe. Go to CUPCAKES. So you can see we can use voice in an interesting way to actually navigate this application so people don't actually have to touch it while they're cooking or going through recipes. Another awesome feature that we have on the web is WebGL. And this provides a ton of new exciting possibilities. It also brings with it a lot of complexity. So what this is Canvas's 3D drawing context, and allows us to draw full 3D geometry and animate it. It also allows us to do cool effects like lighting and shadows. And we can also do other rich pixel-based post-processing effects. And we're able to do this with the power of shaders. So shaders come in two flavors. There are vertex shaders and fragment shaders. And here we can see with vertex shaders, we're actually able to manipulate the geometry of our 3D content. And fragment shaders allow us to actually manipulate the colors being rendered. So you can see that this gets pretty low level and pretty complex. But fortunately, there are a lot of frameworks out there that, again, abstract the API, making it easier to work with. And 3JS is probably one of the most popular ones. There are also a number of others. Babylon.js has more of a gaming focus, if you guys are interested in gaming. And we also have Pixie.js. So I know I mentioned Pixie.js earlier for 2D Canvas, but it also supports a WebGL renderer when WebGL is supported on the platform. So you can get faster hardware-accelerated performance. So this is a demo I put together to show off kind of what we can do with WebGL. So this is my rendition of Ski Free, which is the old PC game. And you can see we can actually play the game and fly around, but it looks a little flat right now because that's kind of a 2D game. But what we can do, because it's 3D, is actually add some perspective and get a better angle on things. We can also change the camera and do like a first-person view. Let's see if I can get a jump here. Hold on. Oh, shoot. Okay. Anyways, it's a lot of pressure, right? Really that's kind of a simple example of what we could do. But the end game would be like AAA style games, things like Grand Theft Auto 5 running in your browser, right? It also has great potential for things like motion graphics. Often for motion graphics, people will animate 3D objects and use post-processing effects to create really cool animations. But here we can actually use WebGL to do this in real time. So we can have this 3D mesh that I'm actually moving around with my mouse and animating based on user interaction. So it brings another level of interactivity to our content rather than just outputting static video. Another cool potential for a WebGL is using transitions and other sorts of effects, basically integrating our WebGL content within our websites. And this is a cool example I found where they're actually using WebGL shaders to do this slideshow transition. And you'll see as we go through some of these transitions, they're actually using really rich pixel-based effects that we wouldn't be able to do without this technology on the web. So I think there's a lot of cool potential for how we can combine our web documents and our web content with these features. Another awesome potential for rich experiences is video. And we've actually kind of started to see video being used a little more on the web and integrated into websites, things like rich full-screen backgrounds for videos that play videos within your web content. And I think video is really amazing because what it does is it allows us to have full control over our output, right? You never have as much control of what's being displayed on the screen as you do with fully rendered video. But it also creates this problem with user interaction. Like, how do you get your users to actually change the content? And there are a variety of creative ways we can make that happen. And one of those is kind of by loading videos dynamically based on user selection, or even scrubbing the playhead based on what the user does. And I have a couple of examples of videos being used in interesting ways on the web. So this is one where they're doing a DVD-like experience. And you'll see here, it's a documentary, but as you play through the documentary, we get this really rich playhead that sort of allows us to jump to different portions of the video in a really playful kind of way. So we can actually explore it and dive deeper into this content, learning more about it, rather than just putting a video up on the screen. This is a website I thought was really cool, where they're using rich video and these rich low poly 3D animations as a sort of introduction to the site. But I actually think there was kind of a missed potential here, because it would have been really cool if they would have combined this with the WebGL-like experience. And because as you see, when they resolve the site here, what we're going to end up with is a really flat sort of 2D site where they have some subtle parallax going on. But it really doesn't as closely resemble the rich video experience they had leading up to it. So here, as we land. So you can see this is the site, and it's kind of 3D-ish, but I feel like they could have done a lot more by using some of these other techniques. And I'm just really excited about the potential of being able to combine video and these experiences in different ways. A good example of that is alpha video. So we're getting support for alpha video, which is awesome, because this is already available in Chrome. You can use alpha video support today. But what it allows us to do is combine this video with our content more seamlessly. So this is an example. I like using this example because if you guys are familiar with the band OK Go, they're this alternative rock band that's known for doing elaborately choreographed music videos that tend to go viral on YouTube. And this is one of the videos they did. And their videos often have some sort of quirk or gimmick. And the gimmick here, as you can see, is they're recording this in front of green screen. And they're applying this post-processing effect that takes the opaque pixels once they've keyed out the green screen and just continues to draw the opaque pixels on top of each other. So it creates this echoing effect where our alpha channel is. And we can actually do this in 2D canvas. So I took the original green screen footage you can see up on the left and applied, and you can see where it's being keyed out with the mask next to it. And we can apply the same effect just by not clearing our canvas context. The interesting thing here is we can actually make it interactive rather than static video. Using things like canvas blend modes, we can apply different effects to it. And we can even change the color of these effects to see how they change and make it a more playful experience than just putting out static video. So let's talk about video games. I really like video games, and in a lot of ways, I think they're the most immersive experience, just because the whole point of video games is to really immerse the user, allowing them to escape from reality. And they achieve this by pushing the limits of the platform. And we've seen this in a number of examples where they're continuing to push what's possible on the platform to create rich video games. But in the beginning, hardware was very limited. And this is very similar to the issues we face today with mobile hardware and uncertainties surrounding network bandwidth. But ultimately, in the video game industry, this led to a number of optimization techniques that are still used today and have even been adopted by the web community. So I kind of want to go through a few of these techniques that have made their way to the web. And one of those is sprite sheets. So sprite sheets are when you optimize your textures, right? You have a bunch of different textures, and you're able to combine these and consolidate them into a single texture. So this is useful in a number of ways because it reduces HTTP requests by using a single texture instead of multiple. And it also gives us immediate access to all of our other images, so we can quickly animate and have instant access to all our other frames. So you can see simply by offsetting the position of the texture, we can animate it. And this can be applied to the web in a number of ways. We can use this in CSS with background images by offsetting the position of the texture. We can also use this in 2D canvas as well as WebGL just to optimize our texture usage. So we can take our little character. This is my game Flappy Guy. So we can take our character and put him into a world and then actually animate the background simply by offsetting its position. And this gives us this illusion of a camera, right? We have this camera that's now following our character. But we're really not doing anything except moving the background behind him. Although the background looks a little flat, so there's actually more we can do. What we can do is take this background layer and break it up into separate layers. And this will create parallax, right? This gives us this illusion of depth, and we've seen this used on the web in a number of ways where people are tying it to scroll events, and they're able to scroll through their content in really interesting ways. So as the video game industry continued to innovate and grow, we saw a lot of cool things happening. And a good example of this is MYST. So this came out back in 1993, and when I first saw it, it was one of the first rich, immersive 3D experiences I'd ever seen. But if you remember playing the game, the way they actually achieved this is by rendering out 2,500 static images. And you would just navigate the game like you would navigate a slideshow, like with one image at a time. So I think this is a good example of how even with the limitations of a platform, we can continue to innovate and provide really interesting, rich experiences. So let's talk about semantics. This is a photo of my daughter, who's almost 2, and she's just learning now to talk. So the meaning of words and things is really important to her, and these are also really important on the web. When I say semantics, what I mean is the markup and the text that's used within our documents. And these are important not only for providing meaning to us, but also the systems in which they're used. So things like search engines and screen readers. So it's really important for us to understand how we can integrate our semantic content with our rich media experiences. And one way we can do that is with a fixed canvas background. So here I have some content that's animating normally. We have some parallax going on in the background. We have these squares that are sort of overlapping. But if you look at what's really happening, we're just scrolling through our document like normal, but we have our fixed canvas that's actually animating and drawing the content and updating it. And this is really useful because for a number of reasons. It cleans up our document so that we don't have all of these random elements sort of compromising the clarity of our document. And it also helps us out on the performance side of things because it means that we're not just animating around random elements or random divs that make up our document. We're actually able to consolidate this onto a canvas, which is actually intended for these sorts of rich animations and drawing. So let's kind of look at some examples of this being applied. Here's a site that uses 2D canvas. And as I scroll through, you'll see these clouds are animating, but it really looks just like a normal website. But if you look at the background, all this stuff is placed kind of dynamically, and that's because I'm doing it in Canvas. This isn't a massive background image. I actually have these little sprite sheets that make up this content. So I'm just redrawing all these little elements to create a completely unique kind of background as we scroll through it. But we're not really constrained to 2D Canvas. Because we're using Canvas, we can also use things like WebGL and see how those are used as background elements. So here I'm actually drawing a 3D scene in WebGL. And you can see as I scroll down, we're actually moving the camera and attaching it to our scroll position. So you can see how we could create really rich, immersive kinds of experiences as we scroll through our content, and even continue to animate 3D, have 3D animation and other rich effects going on as we scroll through our sites. But we're not really constrained to vertical scrolling. The web's a really powerful thing, and we also have 3D transforms. So what we can do is we can actually take our semantic content and place it in 3D space and map it to a camera that we're using in WebGL. So here you can see I can actually fly through this 3D world that I've created and have my semantic content mapped to the camera. So you can imagine how we could create these really elaborate scenes and have all of our content live within it and just interact with it in interesting ways. But ultimately what the web is about is communication, right? It's a communication tool allowing us to share information with other people and interact in real time. So fortunately, it's getting a lot of new features that are making its way to the web to enable new ways of communicating online. And one of those is WebRTC. So I'm going to do a little demo, but first I'm going to tell you what it is. WebRTC is web real-time communication. It allows things like video and audio chat right within your browser. So if you've used things like FaceTime or Skype, where you're actually chatting with people all over the world in real time, this is what the technology provides right in your browser in web applications. So this is a demo I put together It's a little mech warrior style game. And hopefully the internet will work. Cool. So, hold on, let's see if this will work. Oh, the video's not working. Shoot. Here, okay, I'm going to double it up quick. So what this allows us to do is integrate this into things like games. So we can do real-time video chat or audio chat within games. Hopefully you'll see. Yeah, there I am. Hi. And so then we can shoot and stuff. But imagine things like World of Warcraft running right inside of your browser, right? Things where you can actually communicate and talk to people in real time. But not only in the context of games, but think of applications and all the workflows that we've seen move onto the web. Things like Google Docs and the ways we're able to collaborate in new ways. I think there's a lot of interesting potential in bringing these kinds of workflows online and allowing people to connect from all over the world. So what does all of this say about the state of the web? I mean, I think as we can see, the web is extremely diverse, right? There's a variety of different kinds of content and kinds of technology. And there are a lot of people driving the web and building it. And they all have different priorities. It's all going in kind of different, being pulled in different directions. But we really need to be kind of conscious of where it's headed and the kinds of features that we want. As people that are building things with the web, we need to really think of it as a global resource and something that we all depend on. And because of this, it's really important for us to know where it's headed and also be vocal about the kinds of things we want it to be. So we actually have a team at Adobe that's really passionate about adding new experiences and new kinds of features to the web. If you want to check out some of the stuff that we're doing, check out html.adobe.com. But there's a lot of the things we've talked about have kind of come out of this team, and it's a really exciting space to see where things are headed. Also, if you guys like free stuff, you can win a 1-year Creative Cloud subscription by either going to the URL on your mobile device, or if you fill out one of the, I guess these cards are around, so you guys can fill those out and hand them to someone who's sitting back in that corner. Yeah, they're waving. So, cool. And check out Sarah's session if you guys are interested in building animated stuff with Adobe Animate. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming up in the next session as well. But I left plenty of time for questions, so I hope you guys have tons of questions to ask me. I would love to answer them. And you can check out the slides. They're up on GitHub. Like all the source is open source on GitHub, so you guys can check it out. Cool. So at this point, I would love to answer questions. Yes, gentleman in the back. We have microphones up here too, if you want to. Right. So I mean, obviously, you know, Adobe's really passionate about expressiveness and being able to use the web in a very expressive way. And because of that, we need it to be this consistent, expressive platform, right? So we're doing what we can to contribute to that and make it this richer platform. We're also working on tools, and I would keep my eyes open for a lot of cool new stuff that's going to come out to kind of help us build these richer experiences on the web. But without giving too much away, yeah. I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah, I mean, I know that was kind of a walk around, but yes.
So how do you recommend approaching ideation for really immersive ideas like this? Because I work with a lot of designers who aren't quite as savvy about what's possible.
Right.
And it's this constant struggle of trying to identify, it's like, what can we actually accomplish? But we have to know that before they start, you know, developing these ideas at the very beginning.
Right. So the question is kind of how do you teach designers who might not be familiar
like where
with?
do you draw the line and say, okay, let's set a benchmark for what's possible, and then design an idea around that?
It's really helpful to be prototyping, kind of building this stuff while you're designing it, just so you kind of know where you're going to reach limitations and what's really possible. I think we've seen a lot of examples of people doing that, but also it's important to kind of think of it as a cross-disciplinary design surface. So when you have things like animators or other motion graphics artists that can also bring their expertise into certain aspects of the content as well. So I hope that kind of answers.
Yeah, no, that helps.
Okay, cool. Sure. Anyone else? I was expecting more questions. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
I got one. What's your opinion on browser support for all these advanced features? How much can you do today?
Right. So there's actually a good amount of this you can do today, especially if you're. So it's a little different, the difference between desktop and mobile, right? But we're starting to see support for a lot of these features on mobile, especially things like iOS is supporting a lot of the CSS features, but unfortunately they don't have WebGL support, or they haven't enabled it in mobile Safari. But I think what we've seen is mobile is kind of driving this space in a lot of ways. As these features make their way to mobile, we're going to start to see them propagate through all the browsers and be used more in the industry. Yeah?
Is it fairly easy to make accessible fallbacks?
Yeah, so I think one of the great... So when I talked about using semantic content and separating that from your graphical layers, I think that's a great technique for accessibility. Because what it does is when you're talking about accessibility and these things like screen readers and other kinds of ways of experiencing it, you don't really need all that rich experience. In fact, that kind of obscures how they're able to read your content. So you want to focus on the semantics. And what this does is it moves all your graphics onto a separate layer and makes your semantic content really rise to the top. So it really makes it a focus for accessibility purposes as well. Hi.
What are your thoughts with regards to all this immersive experience, and then with the developers I work with, trying to shoehorn that into Microsoft, which can be kind of tricky, specifically with some of our clients that we have that still use 8 and 9.
Right. So, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, if you're worried about backwards compatibility, what you can do is actually kind of degrade your applications appropriately for different experiences. And I guess the key takeaway I want to make is that you don't really, what we tend to do, and what we've kind of seen the industry do in a lot of ways, especially on mobile, is compromise, right? So they go for the lowest common denominator. And I think what you really want to do is kind of create the best experience on each of the platforms possible. And sometimes that takes a little more work, but I think you'll get a better result in the end. Hi.
So a lot of the really kind of immersive experiences it has kind of an augmented reality feel to it. Do you see that there's going to be kind of a clash between the AR and the immersiveness, or are they just going to come together?
So I think augmented reality is cool. I haven't seen a ton of ways that it's really applicable yet, like people using it in a great way. But I think they'll come up with that. I think there's an interesting potential, especially with the 3D stuff and all the APIs that we have available to us on the web, and integrating that together with things like augmented reality experiences. I think I love the Oculus Rift and that kind of stuff. I think that stuff is awesome. Mm-hmm. Anyone else brave enough to come up and ask a question? Hi.
Really cool stuff today.
Thanks.
It's been historically pretty hard to find and develop talent with deep engineering skill and deep artistry skill. Mm-hmm. And what you showed today, to do it well and to do it sustainably and to make it maintainable and to make it scalable, just requires a lot of both.
Right.
And given that the educational institutions don't actually produce that, how are you going to see this stuff really turn the corner and hit critical mass, given that people can't really do it?
So I think people can do this stuff. And like I mentioned, the frameworks are kind of making it easier for even designers. And we saw with Flash, they were kind of pushing the boundaries a lot with what was capable. And we saw a lot of these hybrid designers, developers sort of evolve. And I think we're continuing to see that today. And I think as people become more cross-disciplinary, as with the technology and the industries and the education kind of catch up, hopefully, with what's going on, I think we'll see, there's always going to be a spectrum, right? There will people be doing these richer experiences, but there's a good argument to be made for document-based experiences as well. You don't want long-form reading experiences to be all WebGL-y on you. That would be kind of crazy. But, I think as it continues to grow, and I think as the different education sectors start to catch up to it, hopefully we'll see more of those cross-disciplinary workers evolve out of the industry, is what I would expect. But, hi.
It seems like with every new possibility or technology rising, it comes with big trends, like when developers tend to use the same idea to build websites from, I come to think with the Parallax. When Parallax came out, everybody was doing a Parallax website.
Yeah.
What do you think about these trends, and how would you suggest we evolve from these when we see them coming?
Yeah, so when you get these new techniques, it's really easy to jump on the bandwagon and be like, okay, this is the hot new thing. I'm going to start doing this with all of my content. But I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and really understand what it is that's useful with those kinds of trends and apply it to your content as it makes sense. So you kind of just need to be conscious and understand what the positive attributes are of these various trends and know when and where to use them in ways that add value to your content and your experiences. No one else. Okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap up then, but I'll be hanging out, and if you guys want to ask more questions, I'd love to chat. Thanks.